Welcome back, class, to our Physical Science and the Environment course. As you recall, we covered the first unit, which was in Foundations of Environmental Science, the principles involved in relationships between living things and their environment. Now we're going to take a look at what goes wrong with those relationships. And what goes wrong is often referred to as pollution. And pollution really is caused by what humans do to their environment, people. And so we're going to take a look at the different areas of pollution, starting first with water pollution, and then later follow with air pollution and some land pollution. Although the air, water, and land are really interrelated with one another, so when one area you're going to see is polluted, it affects the other area. So it's really a mixed bag when you look at pollution. And you take a look at the slide here, and you can see right now that the water there is a pipe carrying something into the water, and this happens to be a liquid waste called an effluent, E-F-F-L-U-E-N-T. Liquid wastes are called effluents, and they're coming from a variety of sources. We'll take a look at some of those sources, and if you'll notice, the sources here are found along a body of water, such as a river, or in fact a shoreline, the ocean. The question is, why is it that they're located on bodies of water? Many industrial plants and many chemical plants love to build their factories near the water. And one of the reasons traditionally has been it's a place where it's like a toilet. They can eliminate their wastes very easily, and they're carried away traditionally. So we've had this problem for a number of years. We still do, because many companies are still located on bodies of water. But hopefully they will find ways of recycling those wastes. But right now we need to know what the damage that's done by this. And if we take a look at a picture of New York State, New York City here, and the state of New York, which is largely rural, and there's a body of water that comes right down into New York City. This body of water, as you know, is the Hudson River. And all along this Hudson River, we have various towns and cities located, and therefore every one of those towns and cities is dumping many of their waste right into the river. So it comes down into New York City and the water around the local area in the estuary. So we get contamination as well as contamination along the entire river. The area that gets this water, the Hudson River really is a river containing water from the slopes of mountains which border both sides of the Hudson River. It's in a valley, and so the water that comes to the Hudson River really starts up in the mountains, like the Adirondack Mountains up north and the Catskill Mountains here, but also along some of the mountain ranges that we find almost all the way up to Vermont and Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they're all sloped, so when it rains and when the water is in the land, eventually it comes down into the river and it comes down to us. This area that carries the water, the fresh water to us, is called a watershed. And so this is our watershed, because in fact this area, the Catskill Mountains and some of the mountains on the other side in Connecticut and Massachusetts, all of them contain bodies of water. Now some of it goes into the river, but some of it is also collected in small ponds, lakes, and reservoirs. And this water, which is part of the watershed, is piped to us by gravity from these two regions to us down here in New York City. As a matter of fact, this water, even though the local waters may be polluted from chemical plants, this water that comes to us, that we have drinking water, when you turn the faucet on, that drinking water actually is pretty clear water, pretty free of waste products, because it comes from a watershed area that has no developments. And the result is we have New York City is regarded as one of the best cities in the country with the cleanest water. As a matter of fact, a number of years ago, an enterprising student, a college student, decided, when they announced which city in the United States had the cleanest drinking water, scientists analyze all the waters from big cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco and Boston, Miami, all the big cities. New York came out number 1. So one of these college students decided to take the water from the faucet, put it in his van, and he drove across to California and started selling the water in the streets of Los Angeles. Of course, they said you can't do that, you have to be licensed and so on. But the point was, we do have really great water quality here in New York City, because it comes from the watershed, which is very, very close to home. And the watershed is an area that's protected from contamination and development. But along the river area, we have different situation. And here we see here a few locations, and you might take a look at that and say, what kinds of pollutants are we talking about? So when we talk about pollution, we want to give a rough definition for what is pollution. And really what happens is that pollution is a condition in the environment produced by humans that produces harmful effects on living things. So anything that constitutes the cause for sickness, illness, is called a pollutant. And many pollutants are chemical in nature. And if you take a look here, you can take a look at some of the areas where we have pollutants getting into the water. Oil pollution, from leaks from ships at sea, leaks from tanks that are carrying the oil along the shoreline. In fact, you hear occasionally a shipwreck and an oil spill from ships. In fact, and it seems like an enormous amount of oil is deposited in the ocean. However, there's a lot more oil getting into the water from the land. And the reason for this is that over the land we have all kinds of factories and cars and buses all working with engines. It's all dripping onto the ground, so whenever it rains, that oil runs off the land into the water. This is called non-point source pollution. Non-point source oil pollution deposits more oil in the ocean than oil spills from ships, which happen occasionally. Most people think there's more oil coming out of a ship, and it's much, much less. There's a lot more coming from runoff from the land. So we have that as a serious problem. Here we have septic tanks out in the country. If you live out in the country, there's no sewage treatment system. So when you flush the toilet, it goes down into a hole in the ground, which really is a container which accumulates the wastes, and the wastes are acted upon by bacteria, and eventually, if it's called a septic tank, if it's a healthy septic tank, not too old, it'll do the job of what the soil normally does, which is to break down the waste. So you have these septic tanks. But if they're not repaired, if they're not upgraded, the effluent that's coming out of the septic tank may be discharged into a body of water. It could be discharged into your drinking water, because in the country you have a well. You drill for water in the well. There's water in the ground, and that well is in the ground taking water up. But if the septic system is too close to the well area, the well head, you may have some contamination. So you have to worry about the bacteria that are in sewage that can cause all kinds of ailments. So here we have different examples of pollution, and if we look at that, that's pollution pretty much along the shore. And the connection between the water and the land is very, very direct. So anything that we dump on the land will wind its way into the water. We don't recycle. We just throw stuff away. And so if it rains, it's going to carry the material. And here we have a whole variety of materials here. I don't know if you can see them in detail, but you have some papers, you have some plastics, you have some glasses, glass jars, glass material, metal. Okay, so of all of these types of litter, L-I-T-T-E-R, you would like to know what happens to that stuff. Are there products, are there waste products that are more serious than others, that stay in the environment for a longer period of time? In fact, we know that certain types of materials like plastics and glass and metals, when put into the ground, will stay there for a much, much longer period of time, months and years, and maybe dozens of years and hundreds of years. Whereas if you take a piece of paper or a piece of wood, driftwood, and that rots away in the ground, it goes away eventually. So the question is, what are the different types of litter? And we can divide them into two types. Those that can be broken down by bacteria, which are called biodegradable. And they would be anything that comes from a living thing is biodegradable. Driftwood, paper, banana peels, anything like that. Any garbage that you throw away from the kitchen is biodegradable. Okay, and when we throw it away and we don't recycle it like we're supposed to, it finds its way into the water, and it gets decayed. Now, eventually, it'll be decayed away, but in the process of decay, bacteria are accumulated in the water, and some of the bacteria are harmful bacteria. So we have to worry about all kinds of products. Now, a product that's not biodegradable is called non-biodegradable, and for those products, it's glass, plastic, metal. Why are they non-biodegradable? Because they don't come from a living thing. They're non-biological. That means bacteria won't break them down. Okay? So they'll stay, since bacteria are the main source of decay and decomposition in the soil, if you don't have the bacteria, whatever litter that's there will be staying for a much longer period of time. Now here is something that happens, that often happens, that you may see in shallow bodies of water. It becomes completely covered by these tiny plant cells or algae, what's called algae. Plants that live in the water that don't have true roots and stems are called algae. Seaweeds are algae. Phytoplankton are algae. Often what happens in a polluted area is you'll see a huge accumulation of these that float on the surface of the water, and you look at them and you say, wait, that looks like a healthy place. This algae, it must be making lots of food and oxygen. But yet, actually, if you think about it, there's so many there that many of them die in competition, and they fall down to the bottom as dead matter. And like any dead matter, they're acted upon by bacteria and break the dead matter down, and various chemical substances are produced. And in the process of the breakdown of the bacteria, lots of bacteria use oxygen to break down the waste. And these bacteria that use the oxygen, where are they going to get the oxygen from? They're going to get it from the water. So in the process of decay, the oxygen levels in the water drop. So that affects animal life that lives in the water, fish, invertebrates. So it's like almost what we call a domino effect. One thing causes another thing, which causes another thing, and eventually what happens is the body of water becomes very, very low in productivity, very little biomass, living biomass, and biodiversity. So the algae bloom is not a healthy environment for living things. Again, caused by pollution. So if we look at this graph here, this wheel graph of certain causes of pollution or pollutants, we see that sewage is pretty high up there. Why is sewage so high? 50%. And some of the other things like gasoline and pesticides and phosphates. Phosphates are used mostly in farming. Phosphates are nutrients that help plants grow. They're useful. They're very useful, but too many of them will cause an algae bloom. So you can see that domestic sewage. Why is sewage so high? And if you look at these, the gasoline leaks into the ground. It's absorbed by the soil. Eventually it gets into the water, but not that much, not as much as sewage. And the reason for sewage is that everybody that lives in a house has to flush the toilet from time to time. So that sewage has to be either treated or it goes into the ground. And in many places in the world, it's not treated. We're very fortunate in this country of having sewage treatment plants which do a very good job of treating most of the sewage, but that's not true of a lot of other countries in the world. In fact, in rural areas in the United States, they lack, some of the more rural areas don't have sewage treatment plants, and the sewage is treated in the ground in septic systems, which may be faulty and may not do the job as much as good as possible. So we have sewage is a big problem. Sewage contamination. So looking at pollutants, here is a scene right here where you can see someone fishing, and we have a couple of industrial plants here, and this could be a power plant, and it's burning a fuel, and in some power plants they use coal, and they still do, although that's being reduced, and the reason is because the coal is a rock. Okay, it comes out of the earth, out of the ground, out of rock. So it contains all these 92 elements that we have in the periodic table. And it's also toxic and can be accumulate in the bodies of animals and have effect on the nervous system. It accumulates in nerve cells, and the result of that is to produce an unhealthy condition and sometimes diseases. So it's a toxic material. It was first discovered as a disease-causing element back a number of years ago in the 1950s in Japan, in a bay in Japan called Minamata Bay, and they were making a thermometer, and thermometers have mercury. We don't make them with mercury anymore. And so the mercury waste were dumped into the bay. And what happens is, since it's a heavy metal, if you can look over here, this now is mercury in the air, but it's heavy. So when it rains, it's carried down into the water. And the power plant in Japan, not a power plant, but an industrial plant, was also leaking mercury from the land into the water, and so it settles to the bottom. And if you take a look at this, how does this mercury that's on the bottom get into this person over here who's fishing? And they discovered here that the mercury is taken up by microscopic creatures. We don't see them here. Some of them are bacteria, others are algae, and the algae is eaten by small fish. Here, over here, you see it moves up the food chain, really, from algae into small fish, and the small fish may be eaten by bigger fish. And so what happens is the mercury, the Hg element for mercury, passes along the food chains and eventually gets into us when we eat the contaminated fish. So we have a problem with mercury, another pollutant. And here we can see it here a little more classically. Okay, the mercury is on the bottom. It's absorbed by the microscopic creatures, and they move along the food chain, small fish, big fish, mammals that might feed on it. And eventually, if you catch the fish that has mercury in it and you eat the fish, you can clean the fish out, but mercury is an inorganic. It's not an organic substance. So it stays in the flesh, in the fish. And so when you eat the fish, the mercury is there. As you recall, when we finish doing the PowerPoint presentation, there are a number of questions related to the slides which are extremely important for you to answer as part of your homework assignment. And that homework assignment, you would write the question and answer it, or you could, if you have a printer, you could print out that information. Very important to take care of the homework. The homework will help you on your test, because by doing the questions, you will be learning a lot of information about this particular subject.